Right behind me is Wasabi, an AI agent embarked trained to walk with machine learning back in 2019 to 2021. And instantly it just reads as a tech demo. There's no attempt to hide that. But the wild part is how casually it shows something that ended up redefining their entire animation pipeline. It's just a robot finding its footing. And also, the start of everything Ark became later. And when you rewatch it now, after seeing what Ark Raiders eventually became, it hits totally different. It's like finding an old baby photo and recognizing the face. Back then, Ark Raiders didn't even have a public name. If you weren't glued to Embark's behind the scene posts or Patrick talking about their first project, you probably never saw this thing. Most people only discovered the Wasabi clip years later, around the Ark tech test and its launch, which is when everyone started asking, okay, what's actually going on with the movement in this game? And that's where everything got kind of weird, because once Ark Raiders was actually out in the wild, people started clipping all these tiny moments. Enemies slipping on slopes, catching their balance, doing these half stumbles that didn't look like normal animations. Stuff that seemed almost aware. And that's when the old Wasabi clip started floating around again, and everything just kinda snapped into focus. Suddenly, everyone knew Embark was using machine learning, but nobody agreed on how. From there, the conversation drifted into all these assumptions that the enemies must be learning, like actually learning. Picking up new behaviors between raids, reacting to players in real time, forming strategies and evolving. You can see how this idea spread. Ark's movement looked like it was thinking, so people naturally filled in the blanks. But whether or not that's true, well, that's the whole point of this video. Why Ark's machines feel smart in ways most games don't. How their movement makes your brain think something is thinking back. Why Horizon's machines feel completely different to Ark's, even when they're solving similar problems. The weird physics behaviors you've probably seen 100 times but never really looked at. And what's actually happening under the hood when one of these robots slips, catches itself, or does that tiny little balance correction that feels way too alive for a video game. So before we get into what Ark's actually doing under the hood, I kinda want to talk about the stuff people think it's doing. The theories and misconceptions that popped up basically the second the tech test went live. Like you've probably run into the big one. The idea that the AI learns from players. As if every time you wipe a group of Ark, they go off somewhere backstage, talk about what happened and come back next raid with a new strategy. People also believe that drones must be using machine learning to choose fly paths or stabilize themselves. And look, I get why that would seem believable, but it's a lot simpler than you think once you understand it. None of these ideas are dumb. That's the part I want to be really clear about. They all start in the same place. Ark looks like something intentional is happening moment to moment. And once you feel that happening, your brain just kind of fills in the blanks and assumes the whole thing must be adaptive, secretly running some big machine learning brain in the background. And you see that especially with people who have spent a bit too long on Reddit or X. Suddenly you've convinced yourself Ark is alive. The funny part is, the real story isn't some genius hive mind quietly leveling up between raids. It's almost the opposite. Because what you're reacting to most of the time isn't the enemy's thinking, it's the way their bodies move. Humans are wired to read intention into movement. If something adjusts its balance or reacts at just the right moment, our brain goes, okay, this thing knows what it's doing, even if it's just flailing to stay upright. And Ark leans into that hard. The locomotion, the body, reacts in all these tiny specific ways that look too organic to be scripted. A stumble that doesn't look like a stumble you've seen before, or an enemy leaning uphill in a way that feels a little too aware. And once you see that, your brain just kind of goes, oh, okay, they're thinking. Whether they actually are or not, that's where the rest of this video comes in. So the moment all of this finally made sense to me was when I realized Ark Raiders isn't really running one brain. It's more so running two layers. There's the part that makes the decisions, the traditional AI, and then there's the part that physically moves the body around. And that second part works completely different from traditional animation. It's this machine-learned locomotion system running the show. The thing actually moving the body around. Most games blend those layers together. The brain decides something, the animation system plays a matching clip, and you get a clean, predictable result. Ark doesn't do that. It slices them apart. The decisions are traditional, but the movement is this trained physical body acting on its own rules. And once that clicks, it's really easy to assume everything in Ark must work this way, which is interesting because the drones don't follow this at all, but we'll get to that later. So let's talk about the body first. This is Wasabi from earlier, the part that lived in a physics playground for millions of simulated steps, tripping over itself until it figured out the basics of balance. And when people hear machine learning here, they assume it means the creatures are learning while you fight them. But the interesting thing is, that part's already done. It happened long ago. What's running in Arc now is basically just muscle memory. Like the digital version of everything your nervous system handles without checking in. Like if you get up to grab something from the fridge, you're not constantly running the math on your center of mass, or planning exactly where your feet are gonna land. You just stand, shift your weight, and go. Arc's creatures work the same way. Their toddler learning to walk phase already happened, just inside a GPU torture chamber somewhere. And then you have the other half, the part everyone assumes is doing the cool stuff. But honestly, it's pretty normal. It's just the standard video game AI stuff. Behavior trees, nav mesh, attack selections, basic state changes. The same tools games have been using forever. And that's on purpose, because the last thing you want in a physics-driven world is an unpredictable decision-making layer. The designers still need control over what the enemies try to do. So the brain does the thinking, but in really broad strokes. And then the body takes those broad strokes and does whatever the hell it can to make them happen. And the connection between the two is really simple. The brain just sends commands like go over there, face that direction, back up a bit, and that's it. That's the whole conversation. The locomotion layer that was trained ages ago handles everything else. It figures out how to actually make the moves happen with whatever limbs are left. So when the queen stumbles on a hill or over its harvester, that's the body fighting gravity. Or when a leaper shifts its weight or fixes its footing, that's the body solving stability. They're improvising from memory. None of it is choreographed. It's just reflexes layered on top of whatever the brain's asked for. And once you dig into how unpredictable this whole setup is, you kind of understand why no other studio has really done it yet. Horizon is a good example of something on the opposite end of the spectrum, but I'll save that comparison for later. Machine-learned locomotions is chaos. It doesn't slot into neat keyframes or behave like normal animations at all. Even Embark said their animators basically had to become choreographers, people guiding the intent of movement rather than moving each limb themselves. And that sounds cool, but it also means the whole thing ignores the usual animation pipeline. It behaves differently every time. It blows up predictable transitions, and it probably made more than one game designer want to quit their job. And even if you solve all of that, training the model is absurdly expensive, especially in time. It's not something you can casually redo when someone says, hey, what if that robot limped a bit differently? So most studios stick to the safer path, traditional animation pipelines with predictable transitions, which is just a lot more easy to work with. Embark went the other direction. And even though the brain is completely normal, the brain makes the whole thing feel alive in a way most games don't even try for. You can feel the weight in every movement, and this weird phantom sense of intention that's not really there. Just gravity and learned reflexes arguing with each other. So now that the whole brain versus body thing actually makes sense, this is where it starts getting fun. Because it finally explains that weird feeling everyone's been trying to articulate since launch. That sense that the enemies in Arc feel anchored in the moment with you, sharing the same space, tripping over the same terrain, reacting to the same tiny surprises the world throws at both of you, even though the actual decision making behind them is nothing wild at all. And the funny part is, the whole thing loops back to something really simple: physics. Just a simulation holding all the weight and balance together, moment by moment. Most games avoid this stuff completely. Physics just makes life harder. It breaks animations, it throws off timing, it opens up bugs you can't predict. Designers hate it, animators hate it even more. And every time someone tries to mix the two, something falls apart. Arc kinda leans into that. Like the game looks at the chaos and goes, yeah, that's fine, we'll work with it. It needs that chaos, because nothing these creatures do is pre-packaged. Their movement comes from a body that's constantly negotiating with the ground under it. When the slopes change or the rock shifts a foot out of position, or an attack hits from a strange angle, the whole system has to figure out its balancing again right there on the spot. It just behaves the way anything physical does. And because everything is actually simulated, the mass, the momentum, the invisible bumps in all the terrain, all of that stuff matters. When you go back to normal games after this, everything almost feels staged. You start noticing how much movement is just theater. All the animations like run, stumble, attack, they're always the same. Maybe there's a foot IK system quietly patching holes so it looks grounded, but you can always see the trick if you stare long enough. It's like watching a puppet show where you suddenly notice the strings. Everything is rehearsed. Arc doesn't rehearse. Arc just lets the body deal with whatever dumb disaster physics throws at it. And that's where it really starts to mess with your head. Like if you knock a leaper sideways, it doesn't just play a stumble animation. It tries to find balance. And depending on the slope and the angle which the limb happened to be planted, the recovery looks different every time. Sometimes it'll do this quick little catch. Other times it'll collapse and then sort of panic scramble upright again. None of that is authored. It just happens that way. It's just the locomotion model firing whatever balance patterns it remembers from training. And because those reflexes aren't pre-baked animations, They look intelligent. The moments people remember in Ark don't just come from the big encounters. They also come from the odd little hiccups, or a leaper stuck in the roof in a full panic. None of that's staged or scripted to happen. It's just whatever the physics decided to throw at them. And because that combination of slope, angle, and timing will never repeat, your brain treats it like something personal. Like you caught a creature doing something it didn't mean to show you. Everyone has these stories with Ark. Drones are where people get confused a bit, and I get why. Every now and then you'll see someone saying, yeah, these things must be using some kind of learning system too. And if you look at the clips they're talking about, on the surface it does kind of look like that. But once you look at how they're actually put together, the whole mystery sort of deflates. Because drones are some of the most normal enemies in the entire game. They don't have any machine learning locomotions. They're basically just floating NPCs, following the same kind of logic games have used for flying enemies since like early Halo, even before that. Line of sight checks, a nav mesh, some rules to follow so they don't faceplant into a wall, and then they just follow their behavior tree. There's nothing really wild hiding under the hood. But still, just like the ground units, they feel more alive than drones in most games. And that's the part that got me. And a lot of it just comes from physics. You shoot a drone and the thing snaps back how you'd expect. Or you hit it from the side and it dips in that direction first before it recovers. And those little dips, those wobbles, that hesitation where it's fighting to stabilize, that's the part people end up reading as machine learning. Really, it's just a stabilizer trying to keep the thing in the air. And real drones do this too. Like if you've ever seen someone flying a DJI drone and it gets shoved by the wind or clipped by a branch, there's this tiny moment where the drone kind of wobbles and then corrects itself. But that's not thought, that's the IMU. The little stabilizer freaking out and firing all the motors in a panic trying to restore balance. Ark is basically doing the same thing, just dialed up for drama. Like no drone on Earth is recovering after losing an entire rotor. That thing's going straight into the dirt. Ark kinda pretends the stabilizer is a superhero that can keep a half-destroyed drone in the air long enough to finish the fight. It's exaggerated, but the feeling of the stabilizer panicking is the same. And that's enough to make basic behavior look alive. There's this clip of a rocketeer in spaceport my friend sent me. It looks like it made a decision to reposition and cut you off on purpose. Like it was smart enough to predict where you would end up. What actually happened was, it lost sight of you, checked for a valid re-entry point, the nav mesh said hey, this doorway's open, and it flew in that direction. That's the entire move, nothing learned, nothing predicted. The level layout just made the rule look smart. And that's kind of the whole story with drones. They're simple brains with a lot of freedom, some very reactive physics, and a body that exaggerates every little knockback it takes. So your brain feels in the intention that it's really there, just like it does with the ground units. Except instead of legs stumbling, it's the drone stabilizing. The funny thing is, the deeper I go into all of this, the more I realize the confusion around Ark Raiders doesn't even start with the Ark itself. It actually starts with the word AI. Like the word itself is doing half the damage before you even see the game. Because if you asked a gamer say 5 or 6 years ago what AI meant, they'd give you a pretty simple answer. NPCs noticing you, NPCs reacting, that level of stuff. But now AI means something completely different in people's heads. Now it means things like ChatGPT. It means the models that learn, adapt, and somehow wake up slightly smarter every day. Like this digital brain that's quietly evolving in the background. In-game AI has absolutely not kept pace with that shift. Not even close. And that's where Ark gets tangled up in this mess. Because players come in with this new expectation of AI, that it learns and improves the version. And then they see the Ark enemies move in a way that looks reactive and physical and unscripted, and their brain goes, oh, maybe it's actually learning. And it really doesn't help that the type of training Ark used is called machine learning. That name alone just throws gasoline on the misunderstanding. It makes it sound like these robots are leveling up each raid, when really it's just a pre-trained model running the same balances and reflexes it learned months ago. And because all of this sits under the same 2 letters, AI, it gets even funnier when you realize how far the word stretches. Behavior trees, nav mesh logic, physics, machine learning locomotion. These are wildly different systems that solve completely different problems. But they all get shoved into the same box like they're the same species. Calling all of that AI is like calling anything with wheels a car. Like technically you can, but it's definitely not useful. It hides all the nuance and interesting differences. And once you strip that expectation away, once you stop assuming AI means just one thing, something that thinks, the whole picture gets way clearer. Not just for Ark, but basically for every game. Most of what feels smart isn't thought at all. Alright, before we go any deeper into Ark systems, I want to talk about the AI voice stuff for a minute. Because every time someone mentions AI in games right now, the whole conversation kind of tightens. The last couple of years have been messy. companies bragging about tech in a way that just feels cold, and not to mention just straight up generative AI. There's been more than enough bad stories floating around that people just flinch at the topic before you even start explaining. And Arc Raider sits in that strange spot where it's not doing the nightmare version of AI VO, but it's also not completely innocent either. The important part is that Arc starts with real actors. They have actual people going into booths, recording lines, signing contracts, and getting paid. Their voices aren't just scraped off the internet. Those performances then get fed into a tool that lets the game remix the delivery, make variants, tweak emphasis, adjust pacing so the game can respond to whatever's happening on screen. That part is fine if the actors are paid accordingly. Arc is systemic. Raids get chaotic. You have weather, enemies, hundreds of items in hundreds of different spots. Everything's reacting to everything. Trying to hand off a VO for that would be a nightmare. You'd need thousands of tiny lines that may or may not even trigger. For that stuff, like the situational chatter, AI-assisted VO actually fits. As long as the actors are paid properly, that's a perfectly reasonable use case. It frees up the time for the actors to do the real stuff they're trained for, which is give performances. But that's where Arc starts to use the tools in places where it probably shouldn't. You can hear it in certain lines, the ones that should feel like someone made a choice in the booth, or reacted as a human being.
Look, I know, it's too crowded. I'm working on freeing up some living space for the new arrivals, but I've already run through all my supplies.
And yeah, that's where people get uncomfortable, because that's a line the industry keeps trying to sneak across. That's the stuff that should stay human, and that's why this is complicated. The tech is a perfect match for one half of the problem, the systemic reactive background chatter. That stuff needs the flexibility more than it needs emotion, but it's kind of the wrong solution for the other half. The actual performances. Arc Raiders isn't a villain in this conversation, but it's also not clean enough to be the poster child for ethical AI VO done right. It lives in this weird middle space where the tool helps the design, but sometimes replaces the part that actually needs to stay human.
But a night like this makes me want to get carried away. Even if it's not forever. Even if it's only for a little while.
Whenever I try to explain why Arc's creatures hit me in a weirdly specific way, my brain always drifts back to Horizon. They live in completely different corners of game design, but for some reason comparing them makes both easier to understand, and I've also been watching a bunch of Horizon behind the scenes stuff lately, so maybe my brain's just stuck there, but whatever, it works. Horizon's machines feel authored. There's this precision to the way they move that makes you imagine a whole room of animators arguing about how a robot giraffe distributes its weight when it turns. You can tell the motions were sculpted. Someone made that choice on purpose. Even when the machines mess up, like when they slip or stumble, it's the same animation every time, same timing, same recovery. It's all coming from animation data that someone put together by hand. And once you notice that, the whole game starts feeling like this extremely controlled dance, which makes sense. Horizon needs consistency. The combat system depends on predictable tells and timings. If a machine's animation shifted even a tiny bit, it would break half the encounters of the game. Arc is almost the opposite of that. And I don't mean in a one's better than the other way. They're just working from different foundations. Like Horizon solves its creature problem through craftsmanship, massive animation sets, careful blending, layers of behavior logic on top, and Arc feels like it solves it by teaching the body how to survive whatever's happening under it. I had this moment the other night where I was testing Arc AI. I was blowing off Bastion legs in different combinations to see how they would react, but instead of entering some clean damage state, it just tried stuff. It rotated its torso, planting whatever limbs were left, and walked like it was trying to convince me, and maybe itself, that it still had things under control. And that motion wasn't coming from an animation clip. It was a system scrambling to figure out balance. And because it wasn't performed, my brain started filming all that with meaning that wasn't actually there. Like I was actually injuring something real.
This is so sad.
Please.
Are you hearing this?
I hear it.
That's exactly the kind of thing I meant earlier. The systems give these machines a presence that feels uncomfortably alive. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Arc had to work this way. Believe it or not, Bark isn't a giant studio. They don't have Horizon-sized animation teams. If they tried to hand author every possible slope and fall and weird movement edge case in Arc's terrain, they'd be working on this game for 20 years. So they leaned into machine learning locomotions because it scales. It lets a small team make creatures that can react to whatever terrain is thrown at them without animating thousands of variations. And that shifts the whole feel of the game. Horizon's creatures are stable. Arc's creatures feel like they're dealing with the moment, whatever that moment is. So yeah, the comparison ends up being super clean in my head, even though the games don't resemble each other mechanically. Horizon is built on precision. Arc is built on adaptation. and neither one would work if you swapped the foundations. Horizon would fall apart if their machines lost their consistent timings, and Ark wouldn't feel the same if the creatures were locked to fixed animations. This isn't a value judgment or a competition, it's just two different answers to the same question. And it kinda highlights why Ark feels so strange and memorable the first time you see one of its creatures mess up in a very human way. And that gap between those two experiences says more about the tech than any dev interview ever could. So once you understand what Ark is actually doing under the hood, the learned motion, the physics, the body constantly wrestling with gravity, it's kinda hard not to zoom out a little. The first thing my brain jumps to is that old OpenAI hide and seek project. You've probably seen it. Those little AI agents launching themselves through a physics playground, discovering weird exploits nobody could code. And the interesting part wasn't the hide and seek, it was the movement appearing out of trial and error, bodies figuring out how to exist in a world. And something about that sticks with you when you go back to Ark, because the motion has the same unpolished problem-solving quality to it. And once you start noticing that, Ark stops feeling like some isolated experiment, and more like one of the first times this style of learned emotion has shown up in something people can actually play, instead of just the typical research demos. And that's honestly the part I find the coolest about all of this. Not where it's going, I have no idea. Or not what this means for animators, it's way too early to tell for that. It's just refreshing to see a shipped game trying out something new. Something that isn't pre-baked. Something that reacts instead of performs. I don't know how widespread this tech will become, or if other studios will even try it, but having it show up in a real breakable game, one you can interrupt, shove, confuse, feels like the start of something. And if this path ever goes to somewhere bigger, Ark will be one of those early examples you look back on and go, yeah, this is where it started. By the time you circle back to the Wasabi clip, the whole picture settles. All those moments players swore were proof of learning AI, the dodges, the slips, the weird little balance catches, weren't strategy at all. They were the body doing what it was trained to do, stay upright, survive the moment, make movement feel real. And that's what I love about all this. The intelligence people think they're fighting isn't in the thinking layer, it's in the motion. A simple brain riding on top of a system that trained itself into something that looks intentional. Ark never learned you. The movements simply stopped looking fake.